Hey everybody, here talking about Alone, story Alone, which we have a lot of different readings on, which is always interesting and exciting. We have some people who immediately believed that Maya was a sort of just pure hallucination or some sort of alter ego manifested uh, in life. Other people thinking that she's a literal human being, perhaps a lover of Maya. Um, all that, right? So it's one of those ones that can do a lot of make your mind do a lot of fun things, right? When you're thinking about it. Um, I I'm on the side. We're going to talk about other things, but just to get to the Maya and Mia issue, I immediately thought that she was not real, right? A sort of figment, and I guess the reason is just some sort of early clues. The way that she was there in this single room and things where we're taught. She showed up unannounced with a lot of baggage that Maya didn't know where to put. Felt very figurative to me. And then, of course, by the end, I think we start to realize that she sort of has to be a hallucination, just sort of partly just because of some of the physics of things, but then also because of the way she acts at the end, saying, if you want to get rid of me, you have to commit suicide, which is, as I mentioned on the discussion board, if this is a real person, it's like one of the most awful characters I've ever met in fiction, which is exciting too, actually. So I kind of want to talk about a few different things. First of all, I hope that y'all realize that whenever I'm doing one of these videos about a story, I'm trying as much as I can to speak to the whole class about all of our stories, right? And not just one in particular. And so always using the one in particular as a sort of framework for everything else. And so I want to talk about sort of first sentences and first paragraphs, right? And how we sort of begin and what we're setting up in a short story, right? So, with this one, we began, Maya held her breath as a dilapidated blue charter bus rolled through the intersection before her. Okay. First image, okay, a person holding their breath as a bus goes by. Um, well, they say the first sentence usually of a short story is a lot of people talk about it as like sort of contract, right? Contract with the reader. Okay, I'm going to give you this first sentence. I promise that I'm going to pay off this on this sentence, right? So if you like this first sentence, you sort of interested in it, right? You sort of grabbed by it. I, as the writer, promise you, it's gonna pay off, right? The most famous example are things like Kafka's The Metamorphosis, right, where you read a first sentence about a person being transformed into an insect. If you don't like that first sentence, that's fine. Go away. You don't have to read it. No problem. If you do, and if you're interested, the story is going to give you something, right? So sort of a contract, and I always think of the first sentence as sort of a promise, and the same thing with the first paragraph, especially sort of a promise of what's to come. Okay, and so she held her breath as a dilapidated blue charter bus rolled through the intersection before her. The exhaust pipe situated at the top left at the top of it let out a puff of black smoke, swirling into the air, joining the rest of the KL smog overhead. She stepped out on the street once the green walking man on the other side of it indicated she could do so. She clutched the brown paper McDonald's bag tighter in her fist as she weaved past the crowd of tourists coming in and out of the city's little Chinatown. She supposed she was also a tourist, but after studying in the country for the past 6 months, she thought she knew enough to be set apart from them. Okay, period. All right. When I read that, I feel like I'm being set up for a story about a person finding or somehow navigating their identity with the locals, right, where they're at, right. She supposed she was also a tourist, but after studying, she thought she knew enough to be set apart from them. That to me is the promise of this is going to be a person who thinks they know about themselves, right, or thinks they know about who they are in this environment, but it's going to be revealed that they don't. Okay. Now, yeah, this is a story I think about identity, but not. I don't feel like it's in the way that it's being promised to me here. Right. Even the second paragraph, she kept her eyes low, avoiding the curious looks of locals. Right, that they gave her as she passed with her big hair and brown skin. Another day, she'd be fine answering their questions, and I'll talk about the sentence in a second. But again, the second paragraph, I feel like further supports that it's going to be about her and her belonging there. Okay. I don't feel like that's at all what the story ends up being about. I feel very much like, in this draft, the story could exist probably anywhere, right? I mean, we can talk about the fact that she's a student and she's studying abroad and she's in an unfamiliar place. But ultimately, in this draft, I'm not sure how any of that matters, right? It's very, at least in my reading, it's all very internal. And if the story wants to make a point of saying that, look, she's been running, right, from things, which I think would make sense. She ran from home to study abroad because she was hoping it would solve that problem, that she could get away from Maya, from Mia, I'll say. She Once she was abroad, she ran away for the weekend when they had to the hostel, hoping she could get away. I like this idea, right, of a person constantly hoping to hoping that their physical geography can move them from their emotional one, right? Like people do this all the time in real life, right? I just move somewhere and it'll solve all my problems, right? It never does, right? Because who are you bringing with you? Yourself, right? So I like that idea, but I don't really feel like that much is made of that, because we find out that Mia was with her when she was home, right? But the story doesn't really suggest that she went abroad to get away. So anyway, I think something more could be made of that. But as it is right now, the first two paragraphs are suggesting to me a story about her finding her place in a foreign land. Ultimately, the story doesn't, I don't think, pay off on that promise. Okay. All to say that this could easily just be adjusted, right? And the writer, I think, in revision, you should just think about, okay, it's actually going to be my main comment for the whole story. Think about what is the story about, and what's my main goal, okay? And once you realize that, you go back to your first paragraph and your opening, okay? See, how can I set them up? All right. Now let's just talk about Maya as a character. I mean, she's our main character, obviously, and she's my interest as a reader in the story. I'm curious about her, and I feel for her, and I want to know about her. Whether she's suffering from a severe mental illness here, or she, if you want to read it straight, that Mia actually exists. Regardless, I'm curious about Maya and things I don't know about her. Right. There's things that are just sort of literally confusing that people have mentioned. I mean, we just talk about the order in which we get things, right? How do we know where we are? I mean, for me, in that first paragraph, I don't know what KL is. Okay, so I read the first paragraph, KL smog overhead. I don't know what that is. When I get to the brown paper McDonald's bag, therefore, I don't understand why that's interesting in the first paragraph. Later, I find out, right? But why not have it be interesting in the first paragraph? When the city's little Chinatown, I'm thinking this could be any city, even in America, that has Chinatowns, right? So things like that keep me from sort of knowing exactly where she is and exactly what she's doing. It wasn't until reading the discussion board comments, and then reading it again, that I understood that she was not actually, the hostel where she was staying is not actually where she goes to school, right? That she had actually gone on a little vacation from there. It's little things like that. I think they're simple fixes that would help us sort of situate ourselves as readers with her more clearly, right? But then I'm also just curious about her as a person, okay? And let's just, before we even get into the complications of what the Mia character is doing to her, who is she? Well, first thing we have to ask is, why is she so unhappy where she is? Why is she sad? Well, I mean, you could say anyone struggling with some sort of mental illness might feel that anywhere, but that's, I don't think that's enough in the reality of the story for us to understand, right? So she went on this trip. When she's talking to her mom, she keeps telling her mom that she's fine, right? But the story keeps suggesting that she's not. Well, why? What is it, right? We're just given sort of nods in the directions of sadness, rather than any sort of specific rendering of it, right? The same with James. Okay, this character of James is just sort of constantly nodded to as something in the past that happened, right? And so all these things, I think, will give the reader the idea that we're dealing with some sort of traumatic past event, but without any specifics. To me, it's not as effective. I don't understand what the issue with James was. Right? We get all sorts of things when James. Mia says James was terrible, but Maya says he wasn't. Whenever we hear the other couple having sex in the other room. Mia says maybe James was faking, or is faking just like James. Well, what was James faking, right? We just don't know these things, right? And so therefore, it's very hard for us, I think, or I'll just speak for myself. It's very hard for me as a reader to attach myself to Maya in the way that I want to, right? In order to really feel for her, because I think she's a tragic character in this story, right? So there are just things like that, just simple expository information about her, which I think would help. And a lot of it I think is confused for me also just because of the way that the information is delivered to us. So, I said I was going to mention this sentence. Second paragraph. She kept her eyes low, avoiding the curious looks the locals gave her as she walked past with her big hair and brown skin. Okay, so that's saying locals are looking at her because she looks different because she has big hair and brown skin. Next sentence. Any other day she'd be fine answering questions about her ethnicity, why she looked kind of like a local, and why she didn't speak any of the local languages but couldn't bring herself to do it today. Well, that's confusing to me when I read because I was just told all the locals are looking at her because she looks so different. And then the second sentence says, well, she normally can explain how she looks kind of like them. I understand that we're probably negotiating a sort of small difference, right? But still, just the way that information is given to me, and it's like the second sentence sort of destroys the first sentence, So I read the first sentence understanding, okay, here's a person standing out, walking through the scene. Then the second sentence says, no, they don't really stand out that much, right? So ultimately, I don't know what to make of it, and it becomes just sort of meaningless, right? In the way that those two sentences interact with one another. But then, the next question I get about Maya is the sort of question that people ask in workshop all the time, which is like, well, why today? Like, why is this the kicking off point for what happens between Mia and Maya? It says, any other day she would have been fine, but today she's so exhausted, right? Her tongue sat heavily in her mouth. She couldn't talk. Why? Right? Like, why today? What's going on? That's what I want. That's what I want to know. Did her and James just break up, or whatever the story is? Giving us that information, I think helps, right? And so when we think about her character, we see her as a person that's constantly noticing, the romantic cuddling couples and stuff on the couch, right? We see the first one, the French one, looks at her, she looks at them, sorry, and then the second time she goes down and we see the redheaded man with his partner on the couch, and that's when we start getting the stuff about her heart, right? She looks at her heart, goes thunk, right? So all we're able to do is sort of vaguely attach her seeing romance and it having a physical response, okay? But why? Again, it's hinted at that it's a bad past relationship, but not more than that. Well, that becomes confusing to me, later when we're in the scene where we hear the couple in the bedroom next door, and the sound of their lovemaking makes her nauseous, right? Sick feeling and nauseous. So why? I mean, I can understand it if I think the narrator gives me more information about why. Is it reminding her of James? Is that what makes her sick? Is it her thinking about James with someone else? And is that what makes her sick? Just a finer point on those things I think would really help. And then obviously talking about Mia, okay, and her presence and what she's doing. I mean, the backstory we get there is that Mia first appeared to her in the library one night when she was stressed out about school in college, okay? Well, this is first of all, it's very reminiscent to me of the movie A Beautiful Mind. I don't know if you've read that, but his hallucinated friend, right, shows up in a very similar situation when I think it's when he's actually in the library. But so why did she show up then? I think most readers are going to say, okay, stress was a sort of trigger here, right? And so maybe this is something that just shows up when she's stressed. And now look, I understand that I am no expert on these sort of mental issues at all. I mean, and I'm sure for lots of people there is no sort of rhyme or reason or pattern for how these things happen. But that's real life, and what we're talking about is fiction, right? And I'm thinking fiction, we're constantly looking for patterns. We're constantly looking for ways to understand and ways to track what's happening. Okay, so when Mia shows up, she's on the bed. And Maya, the first thing she says is, something like, "What are you doing here?" And she says she doesn't bother hiding the disdain in her voice, right? Well, I mean, that's good in that we know that she's she's not happy that this person is here when she tried her best to be alone, right? Maybe 5 paragraphs later, Maya sits on the ground and starts eating and then feels all at peace, right? And Mia starts running her hands in her hair. I don't understand at all what happened from the disdain to get her to peace in that moment. It's things like that that make Maya really slippery and mysterious to me, right? Now with Mia, my questions are mainly like, what are her motivations and what are her goals? At the end, she's trying to destroy her, right? Um, which would accomplish what? I mean, depending on how you read it, would also destroy Mia. Okay. So what's the motivation there? Why does Mia, if she is hell bent on destroying her, why does she agree to leave at the end? Um, and not have her and James, in this version of James, who I guess is another hallucination, why not have them both press her farther? Things like that I don't know. And there's times where Mia is it seems to me is suggesting that Maya should stick up for herself more, right? And stick up to her old roommate. I mean, to her roommate back at school who's being so petty about these rappers. Come on, have some self-esteem. Stick up for herself, not cry in front of the class. And so I'm seeing it, when I'm reading the story and tracking it as a sort of alter ego. In moments like that, I'm like, okay, well maybe she's onto something. Right? Maybe Maya should sort of get it together, stick up for herself. How does that morph into Mia being in the shower with this person who looks like her ex-boyfriend and berating her and straddling her and making her listen to them have sex and then saying pushing her to jump off a ledge? That's the connective tissue I'm not seeing, right? And so again, in real life, yes, things are often unpredictable, without pattern, very confusing. But if the story is not making the point of, or not doing the work to point that out, that this is what's happening and this is why it's so horrible, is because if Maya could just understand Mia's role, then maybe she would be okay, but she can't, right? It's not making that point, right? So if it was, that would be one thing. So without that, I think what readers are kind of constantly trying to track, what's Mia's goal here? I mean, what's her motivation? What does she want, right? And so those are the things that I think ultimately are sort of frustrating the reading, where I think people are, at least on the discussion boards, it seems like people are delighted with the scenario of this and they were into it and reading it. And I agree, it was interesting. It is an interesting read. But ultimately what to make of it. It's simple, I think, character motivation stuff that's getting in our way of it, more so than it is our inability or unwillingness to engage with a story that might have a hallucinated person versus a real person and all that. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes real quick. All right, so when I talked about just sort of the story's goals, whenever my advice to this writer would be in revision to go back and just think about, okay, what is the main thing I want to get across? Because this story to me seems like it has two really distinct possibilities, and I'm sure more, but two that really jump out to me. One being that this is a story is a character story and is really wanting us to feel for Maya, for people like her, perhaps with people with her condition, or perhaps just for her quite simply, right? And then the other one is a story that could be like, I think someone on the discussion board said, just a story with like a really crazy psychological twist, right? And it's sort of a story just for entertainment purposes that's going to get really scary and weird at the end. And honestly, I find the scene where Mia is jumping up and down on the bed, saying, you are me, I'm you, all that type of stuff. I find that to be really scary. So I think that it has that potential. Well, does it have to choose? I guess you could argue no, but I do think that it would be helpful if it chose which one it wants, because then it could go back and sort of amplify the things necessary to make that really land. If it's going to be if it's going to be sort of about her character, then why not more interiority, more sort of insights as to how she feels when she sees Maya there, rather than what it's doing now is we're seeing Maya, right? And then we're sort of, we're acting. We get the impression that she's not glad that she's there, right? But then we see the person who might look like James, but we don't get her sort of response to Mia, her interior response, right? To Mia saying it looks like James. We're not getting a lot of that. We're not getting her at all reflecting on how afraid she might be of what's happening to her, right? How afraid she might be of what sort of control she's losing in her life to Mia. Um, we're not getting a whole lot about how she feels talking to her mom, knowing that her mom perhaps just has no idea what's going on with her, right? Those type of things are, I think, incredibly rich and would be very emotionally sort of wrenching to read about, right? Does the mom have any sort of knowledge of this type of thing? I mean, it started before she left, right? Um, has the mom ever heard of Mia? Has the mom asked about Mia? Um, there's just a lot of that, a lot of that sort of the interior life, right? That I think the story would want to sort of amplify if that's what it's going for, right? Now, on the other hand, if it just wants to be a really, sort of I don't know. I don't even know what to call it. A story with sort of a twist and sort of scary story. Well, then it can do a lot of things to amplify that. So in other words, things about how Mia's getting places. So at one point, Maya gets up, goes to get water, and says puts the key in her pocket, right? And then she comes back in. Has to unlock the door, right, to get in, but then doesn't lock the door behind her. Well, I mean, I think there's a story that's doing more about the twist would work with that some more, right? Because why does Maya let her in? Why does Mia knocks on the door? Why? It could do more with making us frightened about the way Mia is getting into the room and things like that, right? And so I just feel like there could be more focus on the plot, and making us sort of frightened if that's what it's going for. That's totally up to the reader. And again, it's possible, I guess, to have the best of both worlds. But my suggestion is just for when you thinking back about revision, how am I going to go back to the story? That would be my first suggestion. What is it I want? What is it I want from the reader? Right? Do I want them to care about Maya? Is that the whole story, or are we talking about this sort of twist? Right? Is this going to be a thrill ride, a sort of strange thrill ride? What's it going to be? Okay, in terms of sort of craft stuff, uh, there's little things about the way the dialogue is punctuated, right? That needs to change. Just if you have a dialogue tag after someone speaks, it should be a comma, quotation mark, then the dialogue tag, not a period. A period always ends the sentence, right? So just keeping that in mind. That's a small thing. That's an easy fix. Um, Also, just the use of gerund form, the ing forms of verbs. I would try not to overuse them, and there's a lot of them in this story. Only reason is because that singular active verb allows us to see an action that's completed, and so we can sort of see it. Where the ing form of it, it's like it's a continual action, and it's just not as clear, I don't think, to readers' minds. I would look for those throughout. There's a lot of those. But then also, we talked. This is a third person story. Obviously close to Maya, and I think close enough to where there's lots of opportunities to sort of cut out what a former professor described to me as like the consciousness filter. In other words, the feeling that writers sometimes have that they have to say, Maya thought, there was no way she could. And Maya thought she was too tired. There was one like that. Maya thought she was too tired to do that today, or something like that. Well, that Maya thought, okay, when you're close third like this or in a first person too, oftentimes you can just take that out, right? And just say, she was too tired to do that today. Because we understand once you've built that up, we understand that that's what she's thinking or that's what she's feeling, right? We don't need to be told that it's actually going through that filter of her consciousness of thinking. Maya thought, Maya felt. The professor that I had was not not quite as polite about it when he was describing it to me, because I was writing sentences like you know he looked out of the window and he could see the car approaching or something like that, right? And he was saying, look, unless this character was like blind his whole life until this moment, I don't need to know that he could see it, right? I understand that he can see, right? So what I want is the car. I just want the car coming up the driveway, right? Does that make sense? And so it's like those kind of constant reminders of sort of our mental faculties. Like he could see, he could hear, he thought, right? And sort of getting rid of those to get us closer to the actual thing. There's opportunities for that in this. Okay, so I would look for those. Are there moments that we're just being reminded that she's thinking something rather than just telling us what it is that she's thinking, right? So little things like that. But overall, I mean, it seemed to me I really like it when stories have sort of alternating reads. Okay, and I think this is really really beneficial for the writer to know. Um, I don't think, and I could be wrong here, I don't think it's a good goal to like want everyone arguing about it. I think the right goal is to know how you want readers to feel. Okay, what do you want them to feel at the end? Okay, confusion to me is never a goal. Okay, so what I want them to feel, well, I want them to feel empathy or sadness or terror, right? Oh, that's what I want. Okay, and so that would be it. My thinking about revision, locating the goal and going at it there. Anyway, we can keep going about whether Mia is real. Was James real at the end, or if this is an? How did he become a hallucination? Does that if because think about that? If James was real, and then he became a hallucination at the end, does that mean Mia at one point was real too, or does it not work like that? I don't know. All right. Anyway, thanks for the fun.